Well, good evening, everybody. It's very odd not to see anybody and not to get any feedback. Shropshire Union Canal, I'm only looking at the main line. That was 66 miles plus two 10-mile branches, not considering the parts of the Shropshire Union Canal, which we now call the Llangollen Canal and the Montgomery Canal. So it was built in actually four parts. We had started with the Chester Canal, Chester up to Nantwich. Then we had the Elsmere Canal, or part of it, from Chester to Elsmere Port. The branch line to Middlewich was done by the combined Elsmere and Chester Canal Company. And then finally, Nantwich to just below Wolverhampton was the Birmingham Liverpool Junction Canal, and that included the Newport to Newport branch. One minor thing about this introductory slide, it just shows that photographs can lie. When I took the photograph, the heron was looking towards Stourport. My wife turned it round so that it might look more appropriately towards Chester. Right, introduction first. The Chester Canal was the first of the canals. It was the only one of the first generation canals which was a total commercial failure. It didn't pay its first dividend for 45 years. In fact, it only paid that because it was beginning to flirt with the Elsmere Canal. I have no idea who Samuel Butler was, but he's a very nice jug. This is the map of the canal as intended. Intended to go from Chester to Middlewich, not to Nantwich. Nantwich was a branch. In fact, the original idea was the Middlewich line was going to go off rather earlier, rather nearer Chester than it did. And then when 60 years later the Middlewich branch was actually built, it was very much more, a more southerly route like that. In fact, the problem was at Middlewich, because the intention was to join the Trent and Mersey Canal. And the aim of the Chester Canal, the main declared aim, was they wanted to tap the inland market.
Are you going to sit down?
Sorry?
I'll bring you a coffee again. I can follow it on my phone.
There's somebody not muted and they're having a coffee, and I'm rather angry. Right. It was intended to join the Trent and Mersey Canal at Middlewich, and the plan was that Chester Port was rather dying. It was being overtaken by Liverpool, had been overtaken by Liverpool, and they wanted to resuscitate it. And one of the trades they had in mind was potteries coming down from the pottery area, take them out of Chester instead of taking them out of Liverpool. Unfortunately, when it came to trying to get the Act of Parliament, the Act said you cannot come within 100 yards of the Trent and Mersey Canal, which meant they would have to unload the boats, take it by road for a short while, and reload boats. And that, of course, made it a completely hopeless prospect. They started building from Chester. They got about as far, far as Barbridge, about here, and they ran out of money. And in desperation, all they did was build the branch to Nantwich and forget about the more expensive part, which would include the aqueduct over the Weaver, which they had no designs for. They decided they'd leave that till later. So that's the Chester Canal. The Elsmere Canal, when I gave talks on the Elsmere Canal, I have the subtitle, "The canal intended to go from south to north," which finished up going from west to east, because the original idea was to join Shrewsbury, past Wrexham and the industrial area there, down to Chester, across the Dee, and then out to a new link to the Mersey, a place that became Elsmere Port. It was just a mudflat when the plans were done, but that was the original plan. But they built the centre part, reasons why I won't go into this talk, obviously, and they ran out of money. So they've now got a cross of canals in the middle of nowhere, not serving Wrexham, certainly not linking to Chester, neither was it linking to Shrewsbury. So they decided to take the join from Whitchurch across to just above Nantwich to Helston Junction. Hence, the main line became from west to east instead of from south to north. But from our purposes, for the purpose of this talk, what matters is they built the Chester to Elsmere Port part. In fact, they built that very first. The third main element, Birmingham and Liverpool Junction Canal, this is rather later. Didn't mention it, the Elsmere Canal was Canal Mania period. Got its act in 1793, was completed, or more or less completed, 1805. Birmingham and Liverpool Junction Canal got its act in 1826, and in fact it was probably prompted, much anything, by a rival proposal for a tram road from Birmingham, Wolverhampton to the Mersey. And so the question mark, do we have a horse-drawn tram road, or do we put a canal in? And the canal lobby won, very much encouraged by the Birmingham Canal people. They're the ones who were very, very keen on it. But this canal very nearly didn't come into being. The Marquis of Stafford owned a lot of land in the what are known as the Weald Moors, the low part of Shropshire, north of the current town of Telford. And he wanted a way out for the produce his lands there, but he was rather dubious about this project. On the other hand, of course, he was the owner of the most successful, financially successful canal in the country, the Bridgewater Canal, and this would have some links to the Bridgewater Canal. Rather against the advice of his general agent, James Loch, he decided to put in £20,000, providing the Elsmere and Chester Company also built the link across to Middlewich, and they got the app that following year. In the same years, he put £20,000 into this. At the end of the year, he put £100,000 into the Liverpool-Manchester Railway. He rescued that project, which has had an enormous enormous trouble raising its money. So this is very much the cusp between canals and railways. If he hadn't put his £20,000 in, we've had no link, probably no link across to Middlewich. The Elsmere and Chester Canal would have stayed isolated and probably would have died probably about the time of the First World War. We would have had no punks off the aqueduct. A whole of rewriting history, all transport history, and in fact history of towns, if you decide he didn't put his £20,000 in. That's history that didn't happen. Right, so now we're going to take a whole run from the north to the south on the Elsmere Canal. And we started Elsmere Port. The first time it's mentioned in the minutes of the Elsmere Canal in 1795. That's a couple of years after the Act had been got. And this is a map of 1819. As you can see, not much there. In fact, this map didn't even manage to show a road to it, because the transshipment, this was a broad canal, this part down as far as Chester. The transshipment was done at Chester, not at Elsmere Port. But with the prospect of the Birmingham and Liverpool Junction Canal opening, and therefore a lot of traffic coming through from Birmingham, they hoped, and indeed turned out, they decided that they need to do a lot of work at Elsmere Port. Now this map has south at the north, which can be a little bit confusing, but you've got the Mersey here, you've got the old canal here coming down through Three Locks and out to the river. So the idea is we put in a whole new basin up there, more buildings. The only buildings there at the time were the pub and some stables. But so the whole project, designed by Telford, was that we're going to be a massive redevelopment here. And the massive redevelopment took a long time to happen. It's 14 years later that we've actually got the official opening. This is 9 years after Telford's death. Official opening is a bit of a farce, because the boat carrying the dignitaries across from Chester was 6 inches too wide to go through the lock. Having disembarked the people and covered up the embarrassment, this was the scene as reported in the papers. Lovely buildings, and this here is the wing warehouse. This is the famous warehouse that Telford designed. Another view of it with what I assume are concrete boats in the front. Absolutely delightful building. But unfortunately, in one day in, I think it was July 1970, it burnt down. Wasn't to get insurance money or anything like that. There's just almost certainly was kids having fun, lighting a fire, and the thing got out of hand. And so the best canal building in the country, I would rate it as, burnt down and is lost to us. Very sad. Now, of course, Elsmere Port is the National Waterways Museum. The other end of the Elsmere Canal's broad canal there was Chester, and at Chester they built their boat yard for making and servicing the inland boats, and also the dry dock, which we see bottom left, the boat just leaving the dry dock. The warehouse, now a very upmarket pub. I'm not sure you're allowed to call it a pub. And you also see there the passenger boat, because from its inception in 1796-7 right through to the early 1830s, there was the passenger boat ran a service from Chester to Elsmere Port and then linked across to Liverpool. This only really ceased when the Bromber New Road was put in, 6 miles of new turnpike, and that was actually the first major engineering works of one Thomas Brassey, who went on to rather greater things. But his first engineering works rather put paid to this, because then the stagecoaches could do the service quicker and probably less comfortably actually, but certainly quicker. The Chester Canal started from the River Dee. You can see how the locks got into fair state of direction in 1958 and were then rebuilt. Actually, they've been closed for the last 6 years, if not more than that actually. It is the only designated cruiseway in the British Canal network which is not open to the public now. Remainder ways of some of those are lost, of course, or being closed. But this is the only cruiseway which isn't open. And going in from there, on the original plan, there were a staircase of 5 locks, dreadfully wasteful of water. In fact, the Chester Canal was extremely badly designed anyway, with dreadful waste of water. When the Wirral line of the Elsmere Canal was built, it came from above the second pound up. But in fact, the water level wasn't quite the same, and you can still see the extra courses of brick in the locks where they altered the level of the water. Typical Telford style house at the top of this. Then you go straight into the Northgate Cutting, which was, well, I have read, I don't know whether it's true or not, but it's a nice story. That is one of the few bits of the canal which actually cost significantly less to build than had been estimated, because the cutting was actually dug by the Romans. This is part of the, just outside the Roman town wall, part of the defences. Chester, of course, at that time was one of the 4 garrison towns in Britain. And so when the canal came along, all it had to do was really dig out the rubbish which had fallen into the cutting. The arch across the top linked the prison and the prison exercise yard, and the canal company, when it built this, had to give the Chester Council, who ran the prison, an indemnity against escaping prisoners. Going around the bend, we come to Cow Lane, which was the main depot in Chester of the canal company. It was in 2 parts. This is actually the easternmost part, which was mainly timber, that sort of thing. Not quite a canal connection, but have a look at the Chester Cathedral in the background and compare it with the next picture of Chester Cathedral taken late in the 19th century. You wouldn't really think it was the same building, would you? Just how Victorians altered a lot of the buildings. So this is the main Cow Lane depot of the Chester Canal, and later, of course, the Shropshire Union. Alongside the canal at Chester, you've got various mills. I believe there was a foundry as well. And on the top left, you can see the lead shop works at Chester. That was got its coal from the canal, and also, like actually 2 or 3 places along here, use canal water for cooling purposes. Now moved about, I suppose, 8 miles from Chester, 7, 8 miles, something like that. There was a pair of locks here which were built in a quicksand, and there was a staircase pair. The inevitable happened; they collapsed. In fact, this canal had Chester Canal had a sort of gap in it for 10 years because they couldn't afford to rebuild. They did rebuild eventually. That was when they knew they were going to be connecting up to the Elsmere Canal, as we'll explain in a moment. But that proved problematical, and it was rebuilt again in 1828 under Telford's direction. And it was rebuilt, as you can see, as a metal structure with rods going back and pinning into the ground. That a lot of work had to be done about 4 years ago by Canal and River Trust because the rest of the estates had broken, and the tops of the sides were coming in. There were notices saying that you shouldn't share this lock, unlike all the other broad locks along here. Bunbury locks, a staircase pair, and here the nice feature is the stables. The canal company ran flyboat services, timetable services, day and night, a crew of 4 men, and they changed the horses periodically, and this was the first main stables you got to from Elsmere Port, where you did the main change. Another lost building, unfortunately, the building on the right, very nice transshipment warehouse, because you've got a sort of canal crossroads here. This is Barbridge. You've got the main line behind us and through the arch of the warehouse. To the left is the branch to Middlewich, and in a mile or 2 further on, you can turn right onto what was known as the Welsh Branch, going up to Elsmere, Welshpool, Newtown, and it had its branch then to Trevor and Llangollen. So this was demolished in about 1959, and we lost a really nice building, a really historic building. And you can see the cottage there is another typical Telford style cottage. Going along the Middlewich branch, there's a couple of photographs here. This is the second stables that the boats would have come to if they were doing the run to the Potteries at Church Minshaw. And I think it's an absolutely delicious example of adaptive reuse, because that's what it looks like now. I think it's a superb piece of architecture. That's really superb, really nicely done. So on to Middlewich, and this view looks totally different now because all the factories are gone. And the lock ahead of you see is Wardle Lock. Wardle Lock was not a Shropshire Union lock. This lock was put in on a 100-yard long, actually I think 72-yard long, branch of the Trent and Mersey Canal, and it meant they could control the boats coming onto the Trent and Mersey. There was a toll, which I'll go on to the next slide, and that's why now, although people generally think it's Shropshire Union one, the architecture of the Cottage, for example, is totally different to the Shropshire Union. It's Trent and Mersey architecture. I mentioned the toll, 9p for every ton of coal, coke, etc. to 9.5p for others, 10.5p for general goods. Quite a big imposition. Bear in mind that the Birmingham-Liverpool Junction Canal was charging only a penny a mile, in fact. So this is quite a penalty. And the reason why they wanted the penalty is they knew they were going to lose trade from Birmingham to Manchester, but boats would not want to go up through Stoke and Harecastle Tunnel and then down Heartbreak Hill. They would rather take the simpler and shorter route down through Market Drayton and Nantwich. But that would mean they'd lose quite a lot of income, and this is compensation for their loss of income. It's quite interesting to me how, when the Act was passed here in 1826, this one's 1827, you've still got the assumption that the existing transport infrastructure, if there's competition to it, they're entitled to be compensated. Whereas by the time you got onto railway acts, this no longer was taken as true. So somewhere in this period, 1826 in the 1830s, the whole concept of competition changed in Parliament. I've never seen any articles or any mention of this, how it came about, who the leading protagonists were. This wasn't abolished until I think it was 1888, when with the Railway and Canals Act, where all the charges were laid down and had to be approved. So this imposition stayed all that time. The end of the Chester Canal was a wharf at Nantwich. It's actually outside the parish of Nantwich. It's about 3/4 mile from Nantwich town centre. If they tried to take the canal into Nantwich, it would have required something like 5 or 6 locks to drop it down to a sensible level. So of course that would have been a whole load of water supply problems as well as delays. So the canal stopped a bit short. Cheese Warehouse was demolished only about 20 years ago. Now we're on to the Birmingham Liverpool Junction Canal. We have the aqueduct. This aqueduct is only 1/4 mile from the Nantwich end. Now I didn't know the canal in those days. This is 1959 this picture was taken, but I used to walk to school in Taunton, go across French Weir, and very often below French Weir you saw all this foam. So obviously they have exactly the same problem on the canals. This is one of the few photographs I've ever seen of this foam. Obviously, a fairly early environmental thing. The firms making the soaps did it in such a way that they no longer foamed like this after they'd gone through the sewage works or wherever. Ordlum Wharf, another Telford style cottage. The Shroppie Fly pub, as is now, was a warehouse. The crane was the second of the 4 that had been on the site. And Lock Cottage, which is gone, was halfway up the Ordlum flight. Ordlum has a flight of 15 locks. This cottage had gone. Rather nice picture of the Telford cottage. Pretty similar, as you can see, to these ones he did on the Holyhead Road. Tragic note here, about in January and March 1913, there were 2 separate incidents where boaters died in the locks, having slipped and fallen in. It was quite a dangerous job in midwinter, ice and dark. Market Drayton, any of you boaters might remember Lady Line, this was their headquarters, and it's now a housing estate where this is where I live. This is a plan taken from the minutes of the Birmingham Liverpool Junction Canal, dated 1832, and this was their original idea here. They were going to put in a rectangular wharf, which is what in fact was done. But there's a couple of points I'd like to draw to attention, which have really nothing to do with the plan. Firstly, Betton Road here, that is accurate mapping. Bridge is skew, whereas the Turnpike Road actually had a straight across bridge. My wife and I surveyed every bridge between Market Drayton and Wolverhampton one afternoon. Every road bridge it is, not the occupation bridges, every road bridge, 35 of them, all but 3 were skew. Some of them were skew by more than 15 degrees, which meant that they then had to do the stonework in a way you'll see illustrated fairly shortly. But putting in a skew bridge is more expensive than putting in a straight bridge. Telford did everything in engineering terms perfectly. He did not cause any disturbance to the road. The cheap way, the expedient way to do it would have been to put in a very mild S-bend. Bear in mind, this is a minor road, of no significance whatsoever, but he did the more expensive option. But even more than that, each bridge would have cost about £80, if I find my arrow. Why not have that bridge, but put in a road across there? Now, that would have saved all that money. Okay, it's going to cost us a £5 to put in the road, but it's going to save £75. And this canal company was broke. It had to borrow £160,000. In fact, in the end, it was 164,000 odd. It had to borrow £160,000 from the Public Works Loans Board. Well, it's Public Works Loans Board's predecessor, actually, which is essentially is government money. And Telford had been perfectly well aware of that, because he was the advisor to the board, which made the grant. He recommended the grant be made. So he knew that they were in financial trouble, but he would not do the thing which saved the money. His whole attitude was doing the right engineering thing. This map has a couple of points of interest. This is the 1844 map done when they were contemplating, in absolute seriousness, and they got the act for it, of converting the canal into a railway. And the black line is the line which the railway would have taken. The dotted line is the boundary of the land which the Act permitted them to take. And the remarkable thing is, on the Birmingham-Liverpool Junction Canal part of this canal, the railway coincided spot on the canal for well over 80% of the route, and was within the boundary, which is usually was it 100 feet or 100 yards? 100 yards, I think, for 98% of the route. It just shows how straight the Birmingham-Liverpool Junction Canal was. As we'll see in a couple of illustrations later on, it was very much built like a railway. High embankments, deep cuttings. Drayton Wharf always been in 2 parts. This part was the coal yard, the right-hand part, and the left-hand part was the general wharf. And those 2 buildings, at least a substantial part of them, still exist from 1844 now. The pub ceased to be a pub about 3 years ago, unfortunately. That was my local. Coal yard on the right, the general warehouses on the left. Those are the warehouses built in 1906. And if you go to Elsmere, to the depot there, inside the depot, they've got a room which has got the wooden moulds for the formers for making the moulds for the ironwork. They're all neatly labelled and dated, and they've still got the ironwork moulds in there for that building. Pardon me. Here's rather later. This is a post Second World War view, and we've got holidays afloat. We've got, and there's a very early, immediately after the war, canal boat. This is the Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. They had a tugboat race across the wharf here. The race was from one side to the other and back in any sort of tub that you wanted to devise. And the only rule was that there were no rules. You were allowed to do whatever you liked to anybody else that you wanted to do. There's quite a nice view of the crane if you're more interested in canals. But on the other hand, this was actually, the race was won by the great-grandfather of somebody I was talking to this afternoon, actually. He was the local town solicitor. This is the secondary school, one part of the buildings of the secondary school here, the Grove School. And the reason why it is in a canal, this set of pictures, is that this was occupied by John Wilson, who was the contractor for this canal. He'd worked with John Simpson on Punxsutawney Aqueduct, on the stonework for the piers. He'd been the contractor for Telford on the Menai Bridge, on the piers there. He'd done quite a lot of work in Scotland, and this was his final job. In fact, he died a few years after the job started, and his sons took over and finished the job and did a very good job. The work which they did has caused remarkably little trouble. The work which the other contractor did, which was only about probably between a quarter and a third of the whole run, that's the part which has caused all the troubles. The grounds of the school, now the school playing fields, the original idea was that they were going to have their headquarters, the canal was going to have its headquarters here and was going to have its depot here. But the committee decided they couldn't afford it, so they just hire a room in Newtown instead. Oh, sorry, Newport instead. This is the first bridge going south from Market Drayton, and is one of two bridges with a date on it. The Act was 1826, the bridge was completed 1829, wasn't open, the canal wasn't open until 1835, 6 years later, because of problems getting water supply, as we'll mention again later. Then we got Turley locks, 5 locks, and a rather nice cottage. It's looking, I was looking at it yesterday, it's looking rather run down at the moment. It sold for £175,000 in 2002, which was rather a lot more actually than I paid for my house on the estate you saw earlier. I think they overpaid for this and never really made much use of it. And here we are at the top lock. The buildings on the left were put up by the local landowner of the Peatswood estate. On the right, we've got actually that was stables originally, and obviously they here ran boats in pairs. Most of the pictures show only one boat, but here you've got the line coming back. As you can see, they're going to be dragging the butty in. This is one of the plans for the canal, one of the statutory plans, and it was originally intended to be a reservoir here. This is Turley Wharf here. Here's the line of the canal, and you've got the top lock, the locks going down, second one down, third, fourth, fifth. It was originally intended to be a reservoir here. That was never built. Second feature of interest, this line here. If I can get, where's my arrow gone? Here we are. That line there, that is a 1790s canal, just about 3/4 mile long, from a marl pit to take material out into the fields, and was built by the landowner of Peatswood. I knew about this, and it was mentioned in an article by Edwin Shearing in the Railway Canal Historical Society Journal back in the 1980s. And Richard Dean did the map, which he showed. Here's the canal, modern canal, 1830s canal, and there's the old canal like that. And I was giving a talk, given a series of talks. We did a walk one evening down the locks. Sorry, and I said to the group, there was a canal here, but you can't, of course, now see anything because we're 170 years later. And then, where's my little arrow gone? There it is. And then we looked across the field, and that is the exact line of the canal. And the second photograph is taken from the road gate there, and that's the loop of the canal there. So even 170, 180 years later, you could still see the Peatswood Canal. Then we get to Woodsea's Cutting, very deep, about 70 feet deep. It's actually even deeper than that because they piled up the material they'd taken out on the sides above. A few other features of interest in this picture. Note the quality of the towpath is now a muddy stretch. Then it was nicely, not paved, it was limestone chippings. And you can see it slopes slightly away from the canal. That's good for the horse doing the pulling. And you had the a drain on the land side of the towpath, and periodically a little culvert under the towpath to drain it. Second feature of interest are the telegraph poles. 1870, the canal company got in some very nice money by accepting a right of way for the telegraph company there. I think it was something like £200 a year. It was quite a reasonable sum. Plus, they could use the telegraph themselves with no charge, which was very useful, of course, for sending messages between Birmingham and Elsmere Port. The background's now the pub, coal yard, and well, that's a typical rural. Hello, my internet connection is unstable, it tells me. Typical rural wharf. This, I think, rather puts the lie to romantic life on the canal. It's doesn't look too much fun to me. Go along a bit further, we get to Knighton. The Capris factory went up in 1912 and used the canal for delivering milk through until the very early 1930s, and used the canal for sending out chocolate crumb right through to what, the late 1950s. What I like here is this structure over the left hand side. I think that spiral is absolutely brilliant. That's the empties. You put the empties in at the top, they come down. The main building on the right still survives, and it's used for well, a couple of restored boats in there. One of the next cutting along, Grub Street Cutting, this one gave a lot of trouble with slippage. As I said, this canal was built like a railway, deep cuttings and high embankments. The iconic image of the Shropshire Union main line. This is the one that appears on the brass plate you can buy. And it was not a listed building, not a listed structure. And I was contacted to ask whether I could help support an application for listing. And what intrigued me was that this is the only one I know which has got a concrete rendering on it. And I wondered when and why. Well, I asked Harry Arnold, who very heavily involved with canals, died last year, had a lot of photographs, and he was not only able to send me a picture of it being done, he was able to tell me the date it was rendered. The day in September 1964, I think it was, and this is when he was responsible for running a trip boat from Norbury. And it got listed instantly. Norbury Junction, the main depot, then and now, of the canal. Various interesting Victorian buildings in there. And also the junction for the branch to Newport and Wappenshaw. And you can see very, very clear from this aerial photograph, the branch going down towards Newport. There's the depot we've just been talking about. Lion Reservoir is slightly back. It's obviously it's about 3 miles further north, but it was built specifically for the branch. It was not part of the original ideas. The only problem was it never actually held water as it should do. It's still maintained by British Waterways. They've got 3 canals, 3 reservoirs they maintain in this area, and only 2 of them, only one of them actually supplies the canal. But they still are responsible for this one and for one trench in what is now Telford. The water level should be something like 8 feet or so higher than it is here. Going down the branch, we've got, you can see Alton locks in the, as well in 1967, 1970. Photographs thanks to other members of the Lion Canal Historical Society. And that's an icebreaker sitting in front of the lock cottage. I don't know whether it's the same icebreaker as has been restored and is in the Boat Museum, or whether there was a different icebreaker that went there. Fulton Aqueduct is an interesting one. We're looking at the River Meese here, which dips under. I had thought it was a siphonic aqueduct, but a siphonic bridge, but it seems it's just a natural one, because the top of the roof of the bridge dips down, it's curved, and the canal's across the top, and there's also a road across the top. And then we've got the bridge just along from there, which is a 45-degree skew angle. And you can see the brilliant stonework. Everything to do with Telford is absolutely brilliant stonework. But I do wonder whether it was necessary to put in a bridge at 45 degrees. Wouldn't it have been easier to put a loop into the road? And a lot cheaper. I'm sorry, I'm an accountant. I can't stop being an accountant. I believe in value for money rather than beauty. What a sin. A couple of pictures of Newport. That's the lock just down by the road bridge. The back of the two sheds is now reconstructed in Bliss Hill Open Air Museum at Barbridge, and is in fact the place where the children have their meals, and they do some lectures in there. Another thing that's very sadly gone is the ironwork here. It's another one of Telford's aqueducts, but this one had the coat of arms of the Marquis of Stafford in them. It is said that it was taken by the by Barbridge Gorge Museum, but nobody's been able to find it since. And that takes you down to where it meets the old Shrewsbury Canal. That was a tugboat canal at Wappenshaw. I had a nice experience of getting this picture, because I was doing some, well, we might almost say breaking and entering, and there was an Alsatian in that house making a lot of noise, and a young lady in a bikini came out to see what the noise was about, and she and I were chatting for the next 3/4 of an hour. She said, "Would I like an aerial photograph?" "Oh, yes, please." And so hence I got this aerial photograph. And you can see the two warehouses, the early 1835 warehouse and the 1838 island warehouse that's got the canal actually runs underneath it, 3 stories, and the goods were lifted up. This was a private wharf of the, well, by then he was Marquis of Sutherland. In fact, he died in that, Marquis of Sutherland died, and the second warehouse was built for the second Marquis of Sutherland. Duke of Sutherland, sorry, getting Marquises and Dukes mixed up. Now this is now a major restoration site. Superb work being done by the Shropshire Canal Trust. They're doing up the buildings very well, but the delight at the moment is the whole triangle. Whoops, come here. Oh, twit. The whole triangle here is being rewatered, so you have a real view of what it really meant to look like. Yes, they're doing superb work there. And that is not a Telford house on the right-hand side, although it's often described to him and looks like one, but it isn't. In fact, sometimes these buildings are described to Telford and they are not. On the left here, this is the tugboat canal. Used to go up a further 9 locks up to Trench, and then there was an incline, boat incline up to a high level. And here we see the 2 warehouses and the plan as was drawn of the wharf itself. I shall have to take some more photographs there, because since I've taken these, all the work's been done. Right, we're back to the main line. There on the right hand side is Norbury Depot. There's the branch we've just been looking at going off, and this is the Shelmore Embankment. Embankments is something that's impossible to photograph. You can photograph cuttings, but embankments never look anything. Now, one of the leading lights of the Shrewsbury Newport Trust was somebody who was a helicopter trainer at Shawbury. He trained the two of the royal family, I believe. Anyway, I didn't know him, but I rang him up one day and said, do you ever fly over Shelmore Embankment? And he said, we can't go that way. Why? So I really would like some aerial photographs of it. Explain that, he said. I'll see what I can do. A fortnight later, I had 5 photographs arrive, of which this is one of them. The embankment, 70 feet high, always cause problems with slippage. You can't tell it from this picture, but it's actually built on a slope right to left. And it was Telford. Telford had many virtues, many virtues, but he was not one on soil mechanics. In total fairness, neither at that point was any other engineer, but he used totally inappropriate material to try to build this embankment, and it kept slipping. He died. William Cubitt took over, used different material, and eventually got it to stabilise in 1835. But British Waterways, pre-Canal River Trust, British Waterways spent several million on this in about 2005, and they said it's we hope it's a 50-year job. It's certainly a 25-year job, and then of course we'll have to spend some more money because you can't ever really solve this problem. Telford didn't originally intend to take this route. He was going to take a route which was rather further north like that, but the landowner, major landowner, this was the Anston family of Shudborough, objected. This wasn't where they lived. They said they lived at Shudborough, but he did not want the embankment to separate where his grouse were bred from where they were shot. And Telford compromised and took the embankment around very much the edge of his land. As you can see, the green area is Anston's land, and he took it very much around the edge, and the trees are now inside, and he can breathe there and shoot in there. One of the leading lights of the Birmingham Canal, when they had a trip on this canal in 1835 or 6, estimated that this change of plan had cost £80,000. £80,000 in money as it was then, partly through the extra cost of making a high embankment as opposed to a low embankment, a shorter and lower embankment, and partly just through the delay and the lack of income. And one of the things that killed this canal was within less than 2 years of the canal opening, the Grand Junction Railway opened in direct competition, just a few miles to the west. Oh, sorry, a few miles to the east. Next down is Hnazel. This was a steam-operated mill on the left, and so that was actually quite a major user of the canal. And then the next bridge along, the pub still exists, still at Hnazel. And again, that's the bridge again, with the warehouse on the right-hand side. A lot of these older pictures are from the collections of the Lion Canal Historical Society. On the survey plan showing, that's the bridge we've just been looking at on the warehouse, but this was a brickworks. And you can see where the material was taken from there and there, and they had a small, wouldn't have been horse-drawn, probably been human-pushed tram road inside, and a sawmills there. And just along from here, we've got the only tunnel on this canal. That's Cowley Tunnel. It was intended to be a third along again, but the ground was so fractured that they made a cutting rather than a tunnel. Going on a bit further, we've got High On, another nice bit of adaptive reuse you see in the bottom right-hand picture. This was a milk concentration depot, and milk was brought to there and then taken by boat from there to Leighton. Wheaton Lock is the first lock you come to from the Wolverhampton end, apart from the stop lock. And you can see that on the left-hand side there, nearest us, a typical Telford lock cottage, and beyond it, a cottage which the canal company, Birmingham Liverpool Junction Canal Company, had to pay for, but didn't themselves construct. And that was built for the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, because part of the agreement was they could control the water usage, and they could have their own staff here to make sure the water usage was as was being declared. We'll mention water again when we get to Orthley Junction. Cross Stretton Aqueduct, very similar to the one that we saw at Elliot Nab, which indeed is very similar to the one to it on the Macclesfield Canal. Sometimes I've seen in various books the road here, which is the the Roman Road, Watling Street, being called Telford's Holyhead Road. At this point, no, this part of the A5 was not Telford's Holyhead Road. There's this Telford's plaque, and you can just about make out there's some things there, something there. Somebody I knew, no, I met him, but he tried doing some work on this, and you can make out with a little bit of imagination. It actually says W. Hazeldine, contractor. Now, some interesting things about this. Firstly, he was not the main contractor. He was a nominated subcontractor, we would now call it, wouldn't we, for the ironwork here. Second interesting point is, when was his name removed? Was it removed right at the very beginning because the main contractor was annoyed, or because Thomas Telford was annoyed? Or was it removed very much later because people wanted the full credit to go to Telford and no mention of Hazeldine? We'll never know the answer to that one, unfortunately. And further half a mile on, we're now at Bellevid Reservoir, the main reservoir for this canal. Telford completely underestimated the amount of water supply needed, and he built a reservoir which had 2,000 locks worth of water in. The idea being you gather the water in the winter and you use it out in the summer. It was increased in size considerably 4 years later by William Cubitt, and it was increased in size again later on, and it finished up with 23,000 locks worth. In other words, more than 10 times what Telford had designed. This is Telford's Valve House, and is a listed Grade 2 building. Very nice work there. It's, as you can see, it's curved stonework. The door is curved as well. The wooden door is curved, and you've got this metal cast iron dome on top. Absolutely brilliant. You think, you know, what does this contain? It must be something really important. And the answer is one tap. That is all that's in it. One tap. When Cubitt came to build his, going to increase the height of the weir by, and the height of the dam by something like 8 feet, and had to therefore build a new valve house. That's Telford's valve house. Bigger. It is big enough to have a fireplace. It has the hanging place for the men's clothes to dry off, so it's a useful cubby hole for the men and brew up there whatever they wanted to brew up. Probably cost a third of the Telford's one to build, but of course, being a brick box is not listed because the left-hand one is architecturally great, the right-hand one is not. Therefore, the left-hand one is thought to be much better, whereas to an accountant, the right-hand one is much better. A few miles further on again, about 3 miles further on, we're at Brood. That building there was originally sounds like the village gasworks, and so that was another user of the canal. A couple of miles further on, Avenue Bridge, the only architectural bridge on the canal, and this is architectural because it leads to Chillington House, Chillington Hall, which was the major landowner around there. In fact, owned the lot of land which Bellevid Reservoir was on as well. Mind you, relationships he's had a lake there, and on at least 3 occasions, the canal company was able to drain the lake. Had to pay for it, but he allowed them to drain the lake because they were so desperate for water. I mentioned 2 bridges with dates on. Here's the second one, dated 1802, quite clearly 1802. But this canal didn't get its act till 1826 and opened in 1835. So what is they doing with 1802? Well, Edwin Shearing died about 3 years ago. He did a lot of work on this. He intended to write a towpath guide to this canal. And he took a lot of pictures over the years, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. And here's one of his earlier pictures. And that shows different, it shows it's 1832. When this bridge was had rebuilding work done on it, the stonemason decided he would clarify the date and recarve it, not realizing he was recarving the wrong date. This picture is not great as a picture, but it actually shows the main water supply to the canal now. It's Barnhurst Sewage Works, and it's the reason why this canal never now runs out of water. Indeed, this water gets as far as Manchester. It's very clean. It's I always enjoy telling people it's sewage. This is sewage works water, but I'm really rather misleading people. It is very healthy. We're now right at the very end. This is the stop lock at Northgate Junction. Not certain what date this picture is. We think it's probably the coronation celebrations, but we're not absolutely certain. It's a 6-inch drop. That drop is actually unusual because usually when a stop lock's put in, the new canal is the higher because the stop lock is designed to retain the water of the existing company. When it was built with 4 sets of gates. Then it was modified to 2. Then with the agreement of the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal Company, it was taken out entirely. And that's when the houses were built at Helston Lock, because that then became the monitoring place for the water. Then the locks were put in again, and there was a monitoring built alongside or very close behind the building on the right hand side. This was Rastrix. Anybody who's into railway history will know about him. He was the engineer, amongst other things, for the London to Brighton line. This is his design for the monitoring equipment and the building. And that's his design for the building. Isn't it pretty? Well, I don't know what was actually built. I don't actually think anything was built. But there is a current modern one, well, relatively modern, and it looks like that. Right. Orthley had its own toll. The Act, 24 pence. God grief. When you think that the Birmingham Junction Canal, 39 miles long, was only charging a penny a mile, that is a hell of a penalty. It was reduced successively, got down to 4pence a tonne, but wasn't abolished until 1888, like the other one. The way they got it down from 12 pence to 4 pence was they threatened to build a proposed link. Now this, again, this map has south as at the top, and you can see there was the proposed link along there, a couple of locks over the Staffs and Worcester and join up into the Birmingham Canal, because most of the traffic is coming off the Birmingham Canal onto there. So most of the traffic is putting water into here. But the Staffordshire and Worcester Canal Company argued that the Act of Parliament didn't authorise that water to go onto there, despite the fact it was the only reason it was coming into them. No, it's coming into our canal, and therefore it is our water. Hence the toll. Perhaps sloppy Act of Parliament, but then blame that on the solicitors for the Birmingham Liverpool Junction and Birmingham Canal. But rather clever opportunism by the Staffs and Worcester. And there were at least 2 later proposals for doing a link, but none of them ever went ahead. They stuck with the forms. So this is the final bridge and the end. But I must do a quick bit of marketing. My book on the Shropshire Union Canal, which of course, as I said, includes the Llangollen and the and the um, Montgomery Canal. That's a solid book. It weighs 1.4 kilos. Perhaps it's a bit hard going in places. There's one chapter I never was able to put really clearly, but that is the book, and published last week a book to supplement it, which is the some 70 articles which I've written for Shropshire Union Canal Society, local IWA branch, or the Friends of the Montgomery Canal, or the Shrewsbury Newport Canal Trust's magazine. 70 articles, rather lighter, rather shorter, on various aspects of the Shropshire Union. That's the greater Shropshire Union. Includes things like crime on the Shroppie, death on the Shroppie, Shropshire Union pub crawl, and little articles about various different sites. Just not a comprehensive history, but just things that I thought might be of interest to the general readership. So there we are. I will now take us off screen sharing and bring us back into view. Right.
Thank you, Peter. We have some questions. I'm just going to start my video. Here we go. Just 1 moment, please. Right. Right. Okay. I have a slight problem of being on right. That's it. Just killed my mobile phone, which I was using as well. Right, Peter. Well, we thank you very much for that very interesting talk about the Shropshire Union. We've got some questions. There are 4 questions so far, but I have no doubt there will be more. I'll read you the first one from Robert, which says, is it the flow and warmth from the treated water discharge from Wolverhampton sewage works that prevents the Shroppie from freezing up in winter?
The Shroppie does freeze in winter. It froze the other day. The one that doesn't freeze is the Llangollen Canal. That is because of the water flow, but this one does freeze.
Okay, well, that seems like a sound answer there. Bill asked the question, was there a wharf between the winding hole below Adderley Locks and Bridge 69?
I'm trying to work out which Bridge 69 is. Hang on, Bridge 69 is Drayton, surely.
Shall I bring? I'll see if I can get Bill to ask you himself. I can allow him to talk. Bill, would you like to ask your question verbally?
Hi, yes. There's a winding hole just below Adderley Locks, and between the locks and the winding hole there's a bridge, which I think is Bridge 69. So between that bridge and the winding hole, did there used to be a wharf?
There's a winding hole above the locks, not below the locks.
Oh, sorry, yes, wrong terminology.
Yeah,
on the Drayton side of the locks.
Yes, that was the village wharf. That was there. Yes.
So that wharf's always been there.
Yes. Yes.
Next to the cottage.
The wharfs on the old Birmingham and Liverpool Junction Canal were almost invariably the local landowners. Because they were so desperate for money, they couldn't by and large do their own wharfs. So that was developed by the local landowner.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Right, the next question comes from Robert, who asks, what was the purpose for the Shroppie ledge, a concrete ledge just below the water that protrudes about 500 millimeters and prevents boats from mooring directly against the towpath south of Brewood? Is that pronounced right? Brewood?
No, Brood.
Brood. Aha.
Answer number 1 is there was no purpose, as far as I'm aware. Answer number 2, I don't know whether it was concrete spewing out from below, so it wasn't particularly designed anyway. But certainly there was no purpose, and it's something nuisance. Yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Next question is from Ray, and Ray asks this: Telford's valve house is very similar to the beehive structures by some of the locks down into Chester. Is that design or coincidence?
I think it's almost certainly coincidence. I think those structures on the old Chester Canal would have been late 18th century. I don't think they are 19th century. It's possible they are. I don't recall seeing any mention of them in the minutes at all of any of the companies. I think it's coincidence, but I wouldn't like to bet my life on it.
Fair enough. Okay, and last question so far. There is scope for a few more questions. If anyone else has any, please type them in the Q&A. Chris asks, where did the black and white photo of foam at Ordlum come from, please? That really is was a fabulous photo, wasn't it? So where did you get it?
That was one of Dr. Edwin Shearing's pictures that he took when he was doing all his researches for eventually writing the Towpath Guide. And he did a marvellous amount of work, but he's a classic example of never thinking you've done enough. You've got to publish even before you think you've done enough. Because if you wait till you've done enough, you will never publish and you'll die first. Now, he died 801. And when he was about his early 90s, he gave me all his research notes, which have proved absolutely incredibly useful. And after he died, his executor gave the Canal and River gave the Railway and Canal Historical Society all his pictures, which included 3,000 pictures of the Shropshire Union Canal.
Thank you, Peter. Just a little bit more time if anyone would like to ask any more questions. We've got no questions in the queue at the moment. It's still 65 people in the webinar, so just give you a moment or two if you'd like to ask anything else. While we're waiting for the audience to ask any questions, I'll just ask you about the lady in the bikini who came out and asked if you'd like to take a photograph. Did she have a hot air balloon handy to take you up in it, or what, or had someone already taken it?
Yeah. No. She'd. The photograph came out. I don't know if it still happens, but there certainly were commercial firms who used to go around and photograph places and then try to sell their pictures to the occupants, and that's how she got it.
I had visions of you being taken up in a basket with a bikini-clad lady with your camera pointing out of the basket.
Don't forget the Alsatian.
Oh, well, perhaps you'd have left him behind. We have one question, a simple question, indeed it is, from Florence, who asks the question, what is the difference between an embankment and a cutting?
Well, an embankment is that way up and a cutting is that way around. An embankment is the pile of earth that you've got the canal on top of, and whereas the cutting is the bottom of where the earth's been taken out. But yes, actually, it does remind me of something I should have said, and I forgot to say, that I might have been critical of Telford in many ways, but his line on this canal is absolutely brilliant, because he starts at Wolverhampton in the basin of the River Trent. He passes through the basin of the River Severn and finishes up in the basin of the River Weaver. So he's got two watersheds he's got to cross, yet the canal descends the entire way. Now that is brilliant.
Right. Well, we have a couple more questions. Nicholas Grundy asks, why is there such a large basin at Helston Junction immediately below the locks?
I would imagine that it is purely to enable narrow boats to easily do the turn. There certainly was not a wharf there. There was a house there, which does appear in the hardback book, but I can't imagine any reason other than the turn.
Okay.
If you're coming from the north and turning up there, your horse has got to go down over the bridge there and round. So it's not an easy manoeuvre.
Okay. And a question from Robert. What are the prospects of opening up the first bit of the Shrewsbury Canal from Norbury Junction, say as far as Newport?
Can I give two answers to that one? Firstly, as a member of the Shrewsbury and Newport Trust, I just don't remember. Yes, of course it'll happen. The locks are in a good condition. They were luckily filled in by and large, so the structure's still there. It's just a matter of opening them out. Yes, you've got to get under the A41 Newport bypass. But once you've done that, again, it's quite easy from there to Wappenshaw. Beyond Wappenshaw, not so easy. So therefore, yeah, it's just a matter of money, isn't it? It's quite simple. I don't know. I'm one of life's pessimists, but then I never expected the Huddersfield Narrow to reopen. That was an enormous surprise, an enormous pleasure. So let's hope the trust is right. The other problem they've got, of course, compared with the Montgomery Canal, is that they've got to buy the land back. The Montgomery Canal, apart from the final 3 miles into Newtown, is still owned by it's actually owned by the government. Canal and River Trust managed as trustees. Whereas on this case, the land was sold off in late 1860s. Late 1960s, and so you've got to buy it back. It means you are a works order. They've had problems sweet talking many of the landowners, so it's not a straightforward task, but it's a perfectly practical task.
Okay. We've done that one. Ray asks, or makes a comment, first of all, who says that he was told by an ex-British Waterways man that the Shroppie shelf was to break the wash from motorboats. Sounds kind of reasonable. And he asked the question, were there 2 basins at Drayton? He was told that there was one at Victoria Wharf that's since been infilled. There
was one at Victoria Wharf. That too was rectangular. That was a private wharf as well. In fact, it's a good example, actually. That was a private coal wharf, and it was still a coal wharf. 2012, it ceased having coal there. It's had coal deliveries probably since the 1930s, but it just shows how once a bit of land is in one use, it'll tend to stay in that use.
Okay, last call for questions. There are no questions in the queue at the moment. If anyone else has a final question or two, we can take them. Otherwise, we will have come to the end. Just going to pause a moment or two, see if there's anything more. It looks like we've finished our questions. So, Peter, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for giving us a tour de force of the Shropshire Union Canal. The whole length and the whole history, and lots of very good pictures and very interesting pictures that you've managed to amass over time, and obviously many years spent studying it and looking for these pictures, including the one taken from the hot air balloon. So thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight and for giving us the benefit of your enormous knowledge about the Shropshire Union. Hope the audience has found it interesting. We can't clap on Zoom, but audience, if you note, you can raise a finger, not a finger, you can raise a kind of hand. I think it's under polls, or no, it's not under polls. Anyway, there's some way. I expect you probably know better than I do how you can raise hands. So please do that. There we are. 31 people have raised their hands so far. And that's the equivalent of an audience applauding warmly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. It was the first time you've done one.